Carson Wise and I, our B'nai Mitzvah, were joking how beshert, how coincidental it is that their Torah portion, 5 chapters in Deuteronomy 16 to about 21:9, is all about the need for lawyers. Both of their parents are lawyers. It's about justice. And it contains in it, one of them we'll read tomorrow, army deferments. But let me begin this way. I think you'll agree, when you visit D.C., that one place which always draws you back is the Lincoln Memorial. Of all the presidents, according to my internet research today, the one we love the most of all the presidents is Abraham Lincoln. We revere him for many reasons. One is that even though he did not belong to any church, he was the president with the most authentic faith. The second inaugural address, which some of the school children here probably had to memorize, may be the most profound religious statement ever made by any president. And of course, we revere Lincoln for his capacity to work in harmony even with his most severe critics, for his ability to forgive those who maligned and mocked him throughout his years in public office. We revere him. I still haven't worked through his Team of Rivals biography by Dorothy Kearns Goodwin, every book about him. We revere him. But tonight I want to talk about why we revere him for his capacity to show compassion. And it has to do with, if not the greatest, one of the greatest Abraham Lincoln stories that comes from Carson and Wise's Torah portion, a part that they'll read tomorrow morning. A list of the grounds for military deferment. It says that anyone who has planted a vineyard and not yet enjoyed its produce may leave the draft. Anyone who has built a home and not yet lived in it, you may go home. Anyone who has gotten engaged and not yet married should be deferred from going to the army. And then, here's the kicker, the fourth category. Anyone whose heart is afraid shall also go back, lest the courage of his brethren, his comrades, flag like him. Someone whose heart is just not into the war, someone who is afraid, is excused from the army so that he does not affect the morale of the other soldiers, and so that this man shall not be disgraced. He is counted together with the other ones who are deferred because they've started something, a home, a vineyard, a marriage to be, not yet finished it yet. Think about the humanity behind this passage. A soldier who does not want to fight should not be made to fight, and including him with the others, who we understand, a new groom, home builder, including him with the others, rather than treating him as a coward, preserves his dignity. This is what the Torah says. Now listen to Abraham Lincoln's commentary on this passage. During the Civil War, there was a young man named Roswell McIntyre who was drafted into the New York Cavalry. The war was not going well for the first 2 years. Soldiers were needed so desperately that they were sent into battle with little or no training. And Roswell McIntyre was one of these soldiers. He was rushed into the front lines before he was really ready. And he panicked, and he ran away. And he was found, and he was court-martialed, and he was condemned to be shot as a deserter. That was the penalty. Well, Roswell McIntyre's mother appealed to President Lincoln for clemency. She pleaded that her son was young and inexperienced and that he deserved a second chance. The generals, however, urged the president not to grant this man a pardon. They said that if he did, it would weaken the discipline of the entire army. If this young man could desert and get away with it, the generals feared that other soldiers, because there were a lot of young boys, would do the same, and that would be the end of the discipline on which every army depends. Lincoln listened to the pleas of the mother, and then he listened to the arguments of the generals, and then this man who belonged to no church thought and prayed. And then he wrote out a pardon for Roswell McIntyre, and in it, he wrote this statement, and I quote, "I have observed that it never does a boy much good to shoot him." He wrote the pardon out in his own handwriting, and in it, Lincoln said, and I quote, "This letter will testify that Private Roswell McIntyre is to be readmitted into the New York Cavalry, and when he finishes his required period of duty, he shall be cleared of any charges of desertion." My friends, that faded letter, signed by the President, is now on display at the Library of Congress. And beside it is a brief note that says, "This letter was found on the body of the young Private Roswell McIntyre, who died a year later in the Battle of Five Forks, Virginia. Pinned to him was this note: given a second chance by the kindness of Abraham Lincoln, Roswell McIntyre fought bravely until the end." Did President Lincoln have Wise and Carson's Rudolph's Torah text in front of him about those who are entitled to deferment in mind when he issued this pardon? Who knows? But what Lincoln did illustrates the truth that it's always good to give a person a second chance, especially when the man is but a boy, because as Lincoln put it, I've observed that it never does a boy much good to shoot him, but it often does a boy much good to give a child or an adult a second chance. We started the countdown to Rosh Hashanah this week, 1 month from the day before yesterday. The most important month is right now, not when you show up for Rosh Hashanah services. It's right now. It's the month for introspection, self-reflection. Each of us is given a second chance. Each of us faces the question, whether we are 13 or 93, how to improve ourselves as well as how to judge our fellow human beings. Each of us at some times in our lives has to confront the question of whether to forgive ourselves or another person who has done wrong, and whether to give that person a second chance or not. And I know, I'm just like you, the temptation is almost overwhelming to do what the generals wanted to do. If a person's broken the law, let him pay the full price for his misdeed, for if not, what will happen to respect for the law? If we let him get away with it, what will happen to the discipline? That's the fabric of our society. It's a valid argument. It's an undeniable argument. But there is the power of compassion, which says that there are some times when we must go lifni mishurat hadin, beyond the law, for the sake of compassion and mercy. Lincoln understood that. God does. That's the whole message of the High Holy Days. And so should we. Lincoln made many huge decisions. We don't have to spend time on the difficult ones in his presidency, choosing the Union over everything else, going to war, equal rights of all human beings, Emancipation Proclamation, reunifying the country with malice towards none, with charity towards all. He said after the Civil War, we should go forward to bind up the wounds of all the soldiers and to care for their widows and their orphans. Long list, you know more than I about him. But maybe this decision in the case of Private First Class Roswell McIntyre was one of his greatest. Maybe it's the one we should remember because it's this week's Torah portion. The Torah grants him a deferment, reasoning that if we force someone like that into battle, we do him no good. We demoralize others. And above all else, it's a decision that shows both the wisdom and the compassion, not just of Lincoln, but of our Torah. It's about our second chance right now as we enter a new year. It's part of our search for wholeness and goodness on this journey called life, responding as Judaism urges us to do with wisdom and compassion. And let us say, Amen.